Welcome everybody, Mr. Viteri here, back at it again with Unit 9. I believe we're on day 4, and I think we only got one more day left after this. Um, so, we are talking about Unit 9, and Unit 9 is all about climate change and the changes that occur because of it. And one of the other things that occurs because of climate change or because our increases in fossil fuels, particularly carbon dioxide, this is carbon dioxide, is ocean acidification. Now, how does the ocean become more acidic? So, we were talking about how CO2 has been increasing in our atmosphere. If it increases in our atmosphere, it's going to also increase in our ocean. CO2 is amazing. It really likes to mix with water. If you've ever had seltzer water or if you ever had a soda, carbonated water, I mean, how do you do that? Well, you just take carbon dioxide and water and you could shake it and it readily dissolves into it. Also comes out of it too. You know, if you open up, if you shake a soda and you open up the cap, all that gas is going to come out. Anyhow, so as the CO2 starts to increase, let's look at this diagram. Great diagram here. All right. Atmospheric CO2 going up. What happens to the seawater CO2? Oh, seawater CO2 is also going up. Okay. And notice these are one of those tricky graphs where it has the CO2 on this side and pH on this side. You should know that when the graph is telling you CO2, you're not going to use these numbers, you'll use these numbers. Now, this is seawater pH, and we see that the pH is, as the CO2 goes up, the pH is going down. Now, look at the pH scale. This pH scale is 8.03, all the way to 8.38. It's not acidic, right? Well, no, the ocean is not acidic, but it's becoming more acidic. It's still basic, but the more it is becoming more acidic. So understand, like, it's not even neutral at this point. It's still basic, and it needs to be slightly basic because there are a lot of creatures, calcifying creatures. I like that word, calcifying creatures that are dependent on the ocean being slightly alkalinic, aka basic. Okay, so please know how to read this graph. Notice what's happening here over the time scale. Know that CO2 is increasing in both the atmosphere and seawater, and pH is going down, which means it's becoming more acidic. So here is a great diagram showing you all of that beautiful stuff. So carbon dioxide goes into the water, it mixes with the water, becomes carbonic acid. This is going to create a more acidic environment. It's then going to turn into a carbonate ion and then bicarbonate. What does that mean? Well, basically, it's going to make calcium a lot harder to get for those calcifying organisms. So there's less calcium for them. Okay, so that's one way that they get hurt. All right, and then also when it becomes more acidic, it's harder for them to form their shells. So now, since they're not getting that calcium, their shells become more or less and less. They start to dissolve. And so if we read this right here, with the ocean acidification, calcifiers organisms must work harder to produce shells. As a result, they have less energy left to find food, to reproduce, or defend against disease or predators. I like that. And I do remember on a free response question, you had to use these buzzwords: dissolve. Their shells were dissolving. Harder to make the shells. You could use that. And this left them vulnerable to predation or protection of some sort. Okay. As the ocean becomes more acidic, populations of some species can even go extinct. Right? Our corals are made out of calcifying organisms. So if the corals go, we already spoke of that the corals are the most biodiverse biome of all the biomes, terrestrial and aquatic. So if the coral reefs dissolve, what's going to happen to the biodiversity there? And the overall theme is when one organism is affected, all the others get affected. So you could just imagine that trophic cascade that would exist without our coral reefs. On top of that, the coral reefs provide us as an erosion barrier that blocks wave action that doesn't destroy our continental shelf or hit on our land and destroy our beaches and make them shorter. All right. All right, new topic: invasive species, one of our favorites. Okay. Shout outs to a student of mine last year. She brought in a cane toad, and that is crazy that she could bring in a cane toad because they are slightly poisonous. Um, if we ate them, I think the poison glands must be removed because we had it in the classroom. It was a good time. Um, it was a big. It was a big female, it was about this big, you know. Um, anyhow, so the story goes these originate or come from South America, where sugarcane is grown, and sugar is like a huge crop. I mean, everybody loves sugar. Um, Australia wanted to grow their own sugar, so they brought and planted some sugarcane in the fields of Australia. So when they planted these things, what they also did was they brought some insects with them, the cane beetles. So the cane beetles came with them in Australia, and they were destroying their crops. So then they were like, well, who eats the cane beetles? The cane toad. So they decided to bring some cane toads to Australia. When they brought these cane toads and introduced it, this on purpose. They brought the natural predator of the cane beetle, and so they brought this cane toad there. And this cane toad, I mean, took care of the cane beetles, but it also took care of, I mean, it was eating anything. The toads eat anything they could fit in their mouths. And I was just thinking about getting a Pac-Man frog. Uh, I know it's not a toad, but those things eat mice. They pretty much shove anything in their mouth that passes by, and so they're going to be eating worms. They're going to be eating literally anything. Mice. They're going to be eating baby birds. Anything. On top of that, if we tried to eat them, they secrete this poison that comes out of their gland right around here, and it paralyzes organisms, causes inflammation. So any of the predators in Australia, the snakes, the crocs, all the dogs, the dingoes, all of them were becoming affected and killed by the cane toad. So in a sense, the cane toad has no real enemies in Australia, and therefore has taken over. And it is a ginormous problem in Australia. The cane toads run rampant during reproduction season. Okay, so talk about a horror story. And so sometimes introducing the natural predator, or so we have an invasive species. Let's bring another invasive species in. Is difficult. Now, know that the cane toad shares a lot of characteristics of being a generalist. It eats a bunch of different things, and then it also reproduces very quickly. Uh, Typically, they do not have any parental care. And I'm just giving you characteristics of our selected species as opposed to K-selected species. Humans would be a K-selected species. Elephants would be a K-selected species. Um, Okay, let's continue. Now, another huge invasive species, the story of the zebra mussel. And here's a clam, and these are these little sharp zebra mussels. And these were introduced from the Black Sea all the way up into the Great Lakes and now have traveled across the Northeast. They're a little bit in the Northeast. There's pretty much, I think they're stuck. I don't think they're stuck, but I think they're moving their way down. So how did they move there? Well, they got caught in the ballast water of these huge ocean liners. What does that mean? The ocean, big boats that carry trailers, country to country, not country to country, continent to continent, um, suck up water from wherever they are, and then they use it to hold their boat a little lower so their propeller um, is not. I mean, when you're really deep in the ocean, you want to sink a little bit better so you're not wobbling all over the place. So they take on some water, but then when they're at port, they can't be so deep in the water, so they pump that water out. When they pump that water out, they had some zebra mussels in them, and then they repopulated the Great Lakes. Now, I have a coworker of mine. He has a house at the Great Lakes, and he said this is a huge problem. The Great Lakes basically get completely filled with these things, and they just wash up ashore. Now, I do go to Sandy Hook, and you remember, when you run down to Sandy Hook and you're so excited, you're running through the sand, and then when you get closer to the shore, all of a sudden you're hitting the rocks, you're hitting some clams, you're hitting some things, and they kind of hurt your feet. Well, imagine that times 1,000, because these little guys are sharp, they're the size of a dime, And that happens on the beaches there. So you could think of the ecotourism, because that's one of the things that I want to do. That's on the bucket list. Go down to the Great Lakes and check it out. But like, it's probably not going to be I probably can't run down to the beach and just jump in. There might be a bunch of these um, zebra mussels that are just sitting there. So my my coworker who has a house down at the Great Lakes, he says every year they have to get a little bulldozer and clean that area because he has a boat launch that is just sitting there, just a bunch of zebra mussels. They grow on other organisms, native vegetation or native organisms, and they will kill this clam. And so they take over. They also clog pipes. So industry, which intakes some of the water to keep their engines cool, are going to get clogged pipes, and therefore it's going to cost that industry a lot of money in either cleaning or updating their systems to make sure that these zebra mussels don't affect them. Now, they do tremendous bad things, but they do some good things too. So, since they are filter feeders, the water in the Great Lakes has gotten clearer. So, yeah, they're killing a lot of organisms, and I'm not downsizing. I think we shouldn't have got them in the first place. But if you look at the CED, it does say sometimes an introduced invasive species can do some positive. And if I was trying to find a positive thing that a zebra mussel did, they do clean the water um, because they reproduce very quickly. But there's no predators that can actually eat them. Can we eat them? They're so small. Um, that it would take so much manpower to open them up. So we don't typically eat them because they're so small. In that, okay. So they're also our selected species, reproduce very very quickly. You tend to be generalist if they're able to live in the Black Sea and all the way into the Great Lakes, and now going into other parts of the United States. Let's continue. Hopefully, you know a couple examples of invasive species. I'm just going to buzz them off my head right now. We have the kudzu, we have the cane toad, we have the zebra mussel, the black rat, the bunny rabbit. What else do we have? The snakehead fish, all those things that we've talked about in the past. You should have a couple in your mind. Understand that invasive species could cause a trophic cascade. They could outcompete native species. They could change the dynamic of a food web or a food web or food chain. Okay, they could decrease biodiversity. It's funny because you're getting a new species, right? So that new species, as it first gets there, well, that's an increase in biodiversity. But as it starts to eliminate the native species, the overall decrease in biodiversity exists. Those characteristics that are there. They're generalist species. They're usually are selected species, and they don't have any predators because the predators that usually control them are probably back where they're coming from. So they're invasive species, sometimes called alien species, non-native species. I've seen them also called. Okay, you should know native is from a particular place, non-native would mean somewhere else. All right, let's continue. All right. So how can we get rid of them? We read an article the other day about some boar and some wild boar taking over the South. I think they were introduced on purpose because people like to hunt these things. Uh, and when I say people, I looked into it. Probably will do it one day. You could do it I think you could do it in Pennsylvania, in North Carolina, probably anywhere down south. But they're taking over. So wild boar, Russian boar, typically, they were introduced. They they're now pretty much creating havoc on ecosystems. How do they do that? Well, what do they eat? And once again, this is a species that eats so many different things. They dig up plants trying to find type of root plants like carrots, potatoes, stuff like that. They'll be eating mums. They'll be eating they'll be eating deer. I've seen like baby deer. They'll try to kill it. Anything they would basically do. And let's say if a dog tries to attack these things will attack dogs too. So they're very, very, very tough organisms. They have tusks. They could weigh upwards to 200, 300 pounds. We even remember when we were talking about this officially, a domesticated hog mated with a wild boar, which came out with Hogzilla. I mean, that's just crazy. So, how can we get rid of them? Well, we could use biological control, cane toad bringing in its natural predator. And so, what would be the natural predator of a boar? Maybe we could bring some tigers in. Not a good idea. I don't think so. Not a good idea. It would help the tiger, maybe, if the tiger, because the tiger populations are decreasing. But anyhow, it's just one of these things that you could say in practicality, maybe we don't want to use biological control. Mechanical control, that's typically like, oh, we could physically remove them, or if in the case of kudzu, if it's a plant, Phragmites is a huge problem here in New Jersey. And Phragmites, if you don't know what it is, in the Secaucus region, it looks like a cattail, but it has like more like a cotton ball feel to it, and when the wind blows on it. So this is a plant that lives in the wetlands. It's kind of like a stalk, and then it looks like a cattail. Meaning basically it's like this. But this is real fuzzy, and it has these white fuzzies that fly out, and it's really bad right now. Right now it's May. No, well, it's about to be the end of May, and the Phragmites is going like crazy. So that's an invasive species. So how could you get rid of like a plant? You could mow it, you can pull it. Bamboo would be one in New Jersey as well. I remember the health department came by my house and they were like, "Hey, can we go to your backyard?" I'm like, "For what?" And they were like, "We heard that you're growing bamboo." I was like, "I'm not growing bamboo." So they went to my backyard. It was my neighbor who's growing bamboo. So like, it's pretty serious. Uh, they want to make sure that nobody is using particular plants or stuff like that. Now you could go to the 99-cent store and buy a bamboo plant, and it's in water, and that is something that people could have, but you're not supposed to plant it. You're supposed to just have that as an ornamental item. Okay, so pulling it out, mechanically mowing it, cutting it down. You could use a chemical control. Of course, chemical controls, I would possibly use that as a last resort. Remember integrated pest management. You could hire people to kill these things, and that's what they're doing down south. I believe that they'll even pay you like $200 or something like that to kill a boar and bring it to them. I know uh, the snakehead, you're supposed to kill that on site. And this is like, you'll see signs where the snakehead is going to be, and that's going to be in Maryland. Um, kill, kill this thing. Um, Ways that they try to get rid of things. So if there was let's say, a particular fish and it was isolated to a particular pond, sometimes they'll throw chemical control in there, kill all the fish to make sure that this fish doesn't reproduce. Because a fish could lay up to 300,000 eggs, depending on the species. All right. So please know some ways that we can get rid of some invasive species. Let's continue. All right. And let's see how much we got left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're going to keep this for tomorrow. And I hope you enjoy your day today. Bye, everybody.